Why was she still wearing lip gloss at 500 formation? That's what everyone wondered, though no one said it loud enough for the drill instructor to hear. They muttered it under their breath, smirked into their sleeves, rolled their eyes as if her presence was some kind of joke. Staff Sergeant Caldwell stood at the edge of formation, spine straight, hands clasped perfectly behind her back, chin angled with textbook precision. Her uniform was flawless, pressed so sharp it could have cut paper. Her boots gleamed like black mirrors. Not a single strand of hair dared fall out of place. Everything about her was regulation perfect, except her face. Foundation that looked too natural to be accidental. Eyeliner wings so precise they could have been drawn with calipers. A touch of mascara that made her lashes impossibly long. And yes, the lip gloss. Clear, professional, but undeniable. At Fort, where mud, sweat, and grit were the real makeup of soldiers, her face stood out like neon in the dark. "Check out Barbie over there," someone muttered. Corporal Jake, loud enough for the ranks around him to hear, soft enough to make sure she couldn't answer back. Maybe she got lost on her way to a photo shoot. Lance Corporal Davis snickered. Does she think this is Army modeling school? The ripple of mockery traveled down the line, quick and cruel. Because in their minds, soldiers weren't supposed to look pretty. Soldiers were supposed to look tired, dirty, and ready to bleed. And Caldwell didn't fit the picture they had in their heads. Private First Class Brandon Walker pulled out his phone discreetly, the glow of the screen flashing against his young face. "This is going straight to tick," he whispered. "Wait till the guys back home see what passes for tough these days." Didn't flinch, didn't shift her weight, didn't even blink. Her stillness was unnerving, like marble carved into human form. But that only made her look more like an actor in costume than a soldier standing ready for duty. Then the voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Attention!" Sergeant First Class Hayes, 30 years of service etched into every line on his face. Desert storms, urban firefights, too many goodbyes. He had no patience for games and no tolerance for pretense. The formation snapped to stillness, but Hayes's eyes locked on her. Caldwell, the transfer. He started toward her with that deliberate stride every soldier recognizes, the stride of a senior NCO about to ruin someone's day. His boots bit into the gravel with each step. He stopped in front of her, clipboard in hand. "Caldwell," he said flatly. "Sergeant," she answered, her voice even. "You're the transfer from Bennying." "Yes, Sergeant. Temporary assignment. Advanced marksmanship instruction." A few snickers rippled again. Marksmanship instruction, from someone worried about smudging her lipstick. Hayes gave her a slow inspection, the kind that felt less like a look and more like a judgment. His gaze moved down her frame, from regulation hair to spotless boots, and like everyone else, he lingered at her face. She didn't move, didn't break, but she didn't hide either. "All right, listen up," Hayes barked, turning to the formation. "Standard qualification course, 300 meters, iron sights only, 40 rounds prone supported and unsupported. You know the drill." The soldiers broke ranks, heading to their firing lanes, and Davis deliberately claimed spots close enough to watch, smirked as he adjusted his sling. "Watch this," he muttered. "Princess is about to learn what real shooting looks like." Said nothing. She laid her mat down with practiced precision, each movement deliberate, exact, rehearsed into her bones. She checked her rifle's action, inspected her ammo, adjusted her sights. No rush, no flare, just ritual. The line settled into prone supported position. The command came. "Load and lock. You have 2 minutes for 10 rounds." The range erupted in gunfire. His rifle cracked aggressively, loud and fast, every shot thrown like a punch. Davis took careful aim, packing herself. Walker fumbled nervously, firing in clusters. His rifle spoke differently. Each shot landed in its own silence, as though the world paused just long enough for her finger to pull the trigger. Spaced evenly. Breath steady. The rhythm of someone who wasn't aiming at paper, but at something else entirely. "Cease fire," stood quickly, dusting himself off with smug satisfaction. 38 out of 40, he called out, loud enough for the whole range to hear. Respectable, Davis managed 35, Walker 32. Then Hayes looked downrange at its target through his scope. He froze, adjusted the focus, looked again. 40 out of 40, he said quietly. The range went still, even lost his smirk. Lucky morning, he muttered, though his voice carried less conviction now. But Hayes wasn't done. Unsupported position, 10 rounds. This was harder. Without the mat, without artificial support, even the best soldiers wavered. Bodies trembled, shots spread wide, dropped 6, Davis 7, Walker 8. Another 40. Perfect again. When Hayes walked back down the line to her, his expression was unreadable. "Caldwell," he said slowly, "what's your MOS?" 11 Bravo Sergeant, Infantry. "That's not what I asked." "Same place everyone else learns," she said, wiping her rifle with methodical precision. "Basic training." But as her jacket shifted, the glint of something silver flashed on her collar. A small pin, crosshairs etched over a skull, squinted, and something in his gut turned. He didn't know why, but it made him uneasy. That evening the dining facility buzzed with the usual chaos, boots squeaking on tile, trays clattering, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Soldiers laughed, complained, traded stories. Sat alone in the corner, her movements measured, calm, like none of the noise reached her. 3 tables away, leaned into Davis and Walker. His voice dropped low. "I'm telling you, nobody shoots like that. Nobody." Walker shook his head. "Olympics maybe, or some competition team." "Competition shooters don't wear gloss to formation," muttered. Their whispers carried farther than they meant. Far enough for Master Sergeant Stone, 2 tour in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, to hear. She walked over, fork in hand, casual but curious. "What are you kids talking about?" Showed her his phone, the picture he'd taken of on the range. He zoomed in. The pin gleamed in the corner of the screen. Stone froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She stared at the insignia until her face went pale. "Where'd you see this?" she asked quietly. "On the range," said, suddenly unsure. "Why, you recognize it." Stone's voice dropped lower. "That's not a competition badge, that's Ghost Valley." The words hit their table like a stone dropped into water. Walker frowned. "Ghost Valley, isn't that like a myth?" Stone looked him dead in the eye. "Son, I was stationed at Carson when they came through for joint training. Ghost Valley isn't a myth." She nodded toward the corner, where ate in silence, makeup still flawless after a 12-hour day. "It's the deadliest sniper battalion this country ever fielded." The air in the room seemed to shift. Conversations dimmed. And at that table, 3 young soldiers began to realize that maybe, just maybe, they hadn't been laughing at a princess. They'd been mocking a ghost. How could every shot sound like silence? That's what kept replaying in their minds. Long after the range, long after the mocking died down, the image of Caldwell's stillness haunted them. At dinner, Master Sergeant Stone's words had cracked the floor beneath their certainty. Ghost Valley, not a myth, a name whispered like something half forbidden, half legend. But legends weren't supposed to sit alone in the corner, eating quietly, face still immaculate as if war itself couldn't smudge her foundation. "Ghost Valley is real," Walker finally whispered, his fork hovering in midair. Stone leaned in closer, her voice steady, her eyes hard. "Not real, deadly. You kids don't understand. That pin she wears, it doesn't get handed out, it's earned, at distances you can't even imagine." Frowned, his confidence shaken but not fully broken. "Stories, NCO club rumors, they make units sound scarier than they are. Hell, people said Delta could read your thoughts if you looked them in the eye." Stone turned on him and her look silenced the bravado. I've seen Ghost Valley train. They didn't need rumors. They had skill. Cold, disciplined, surgical skill. Snipers that could split atoms if you gave them coordinates. The words dropped heavy, pulling the air out of their table. And then, sharp, purposeful, carrying weight. Colonel Williams entered the dining facility. 30 years of command, her silver hair coiled in a perfect bun, her uniform showing the scars of constant use. She didn't need to raise her voice. Authority lived in the way she walked. She moved toward the coffee station, just another routine night, until the shift in the room caught her attention. Soldiers weren't laughing anymore, weren't talking, weren't moving naturally. Their eyes weren't on her, they were on. Williams followed their gaze, and then she saw it. The pin. Her breath caught, not military rigidity, but shock, real human shock. She froze, her eyes locked on Caldwell like she'd just seen someone she thought was dead. Every table nearby went silent. Soldiers sensed something, even if they didn't know what. Williams's stride slowed, softened as she approached his table. She didn't bark orders, didn't demand attention. She just stood there, staring at the silver insignia on that otherwise ordinary jacket. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but carrying. "That pin, where did you get it?" Lifted her eyes, calm as ever, meeting the colonel's gaze without a trace of hesitation. "Earned it," she said simply. Her tone wasn't boastful, wasn't defensive, just fact. Colonel Williams lowered herself into the chair across from her, the room collectively holding its breath. Soldiers leaned forward, listening, straining to hear words they weren't sure they were supposed to hear. "Ghost Valley Battalion," Williams said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Nevada Training Facility. What was your designation?" Didn't pause. "Sierra 7, active 2018 through 2021. The colonel blinked. A classified puzzle began assembling in her mind. She whispered again, "Silent thunder." Steady nod was the only answer. Nearly dropped his fork. Davis covered her mouth with her hand. Walker looked like he just glimpsed the edge of a world he hadn't known existed. Williams leaned back, her expression grim. "Do you know what that means?" she asked, this time to the room more than two. Blank faces stared back. "It means," Williams said slowly, "you've been mocking one of the deadliest precision shooters this country has ever produced." Gasps, a silence thick enough to choke on. Even the sound of boots scuffing tile felt loud. "What's your longest confirmed?" the colonel asked, her voice cautious, like the answer might hurt. 2,300 meters, replied. Her tone carried no pride, no triumph, just numbers, just truth. The dining facility reeled, nearly a mile and a half. A shot most soldiers couldn't even imagine aiming at, let alone hitting. Master Sergeant Stone let out a low whistle. "That's not shooting," she muttered. "That's mathematics with explosives." The colonel turned back to how. Dabbed at her lips with a napkin, as composed as if she were explaining a recipe. "Ballistics, meteorology, patience, a steady hand." "But the makeup," Davis blurted, unable to stop herself. "Why the makeup?" Finally's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, not quite a smirk, something quieter, sharper. "Because camouflage doesn't always come in green and brown," she said softly. "Sometimes it's looking exactly like what people expect to dismiss." The silence deepened. Soldiers looked down at their trays, embarrassed. Others stared at with awe they hadn't felt before. Stone's voice came low, reverent. "You let us underestimate you." Shook her head gently. "I let you reveal your own assumptions. There's a difference." Colonel Williams rose slowly, her chair scraping the floor. Her gaze swept the young soldiers, their flushed faces, their uneasy postures. "This," she said firmly, "is why you don't judge a book by its cover. This woman has forgotten more about precision shooting than most of you will ever learn, and she did it while you mocked her lip gloss." She reached into her jacket, pulling out a small case. Inside was a challenge coin, heavy with meaning. She placed it on the table between them. "Ghost Valley Command coin," she said. "Been holding this for 20 years, waiting for the right hands." Picked it up carefully the way she handled her rifle, examined it, then nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like something else. A weight, a lesson. By the next morning, the whispers had spread through the base like wildfire. A perfect stranger, written off as pretty, had been revealed as one of the most lethal snipers the Army had ever known. And in the quiet of the barracks, Caldwell folded her jacket with military precision. On the collar, the pin gleamed under the dim light. She stared at it for a long time, then unpinned it, set it carefully on the fabric. The bunk would be empty tomorrow, but she would leave something behind. A reminder. Pretty doesn't mean weak. Remember that always. Why was her bunk already empty the next morning? That's what stopped in his tracks when he walked into the barracks. The bed was stripped tight as a drum, boots squared, gear gone. Only one thing remained, her jacket, folded with knife-edge precision. And the pin. The silver insignia lay gleaming in the thin slice of sunrise breaking through the blinds. Crosshairs etched over a skull, catching the light like it had a life of its own. Pinned beneath it a note, block letters, 7 words. Pretty doesn't mean weak. Remember that always. No signature, none needed. Stood there longer than he wanted to admit. He thought about the video on his phone, the mocking voice he'd used, the laughter that had seemed harmless until it was. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then he deleted it just like that. Gone. "Where'd she go?" Walker asked behind him, his voice hushed. "Orders were temporary," muttered. "She's gone." But the truth was heavier. She hadn't just left. She left something behind. Something that weighed more than her duffel ever had. Word spread through Fort with the efficiency of military gossip. Some said she'd been whisked away on a classified mission overseas. Others whispered she'd been reassigned to Delta, or even vanished into a black program nobody admitted existed. But the pin remained, a relic, a warning, a lesson. That night in the dining facility, the whispers turned into arguments. "She was Ghost Valley," Walker said, leaning across the table. "The real thing, perfect scores on the range. 2,300-meter confirmed. That's not normal." "Come on," Private Lisa Henderson scoffed. "Ghost Valley's just a story. A scary bedtime tale for infantry who want to believe in legends." "Tell that to Colonel Williams," Davis shot back. She knew exactly what that pin meant, handed her a command coin on the spot. The argument drew eyes. Soldiers shifted their trays closer. Rumors had already become half-truths. "Fine," Henderson pressed. "Why the makeup then? Why play dress-up if she's so damn lethal?" Spoke before he could stop himself. His voice wasn't mocking this time. It was soft, almost reverent. "She told us," he said. "Camouflage the best kind, looking like what people expect to dismiss." The words settled over the table. Soldiers thought about it, realized they'd all fallen for it, realized they'd all been the lesson. Across the room, Master Sergeant Stone listened quietly, her fork paused halfway. Finally she stood, moving toward them with deliberate calm. "You all want to know the truth?" she asked. Heads nodded. Stone folded her arms, looking from face to face. "Ghost Valley isn't a myth, it's classified. You won't find it on Google. You won't read about it in any manual, but I'll tell you this, I've seen those soldiers train. They weren't like us. They weren't even like Rangers or Recon. They were something else. Precision incarnate. You don't measure their worth in push-ups or ruck times. You measure it in impossible shots they made possible." The group went quiet. "Then why'd she leave the pin?" Davis asked. Stone's eyes softened. "Because she wanted you to learn. She knew she didn't need to stay here to prove anything. You'd already been taught the lesson." The next day, soldiers trickled into the barracks one by one to look at the folded jacket. None touched it. None dared. They just stood and stared. A few took photos. Most just let the sight burn itself into memory. For some it became a shrine, for others a haunting. Found himself returning late at night when the barracks were quiet. He'd sit on the opposite bunk, staring at the pin, the note, the empty space where she'd slept. The words gnawed at him. Pretty doesn't mean weak. Remember that always. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the times he'd laughed too quickly, judged too easily, dismissed too thoughtlessly. Days passed, the story grew legs. By the end of the week, people he'd never met approached him in the chow line. "Is it true?" they asked. "Was she really Ghost Valley?" He didn't know how to answer, but deep down he knew the truth didn't matter. The lesson did. 3 weeks later, during evening chow, Walker slammed his tray down across from. His eyes were wild, desperate. "I can't convince them," he said. "Convince who?" "The new transfers. They think we're making it up. They think Ghost Valley was some fairy tale we cooked up to make ourselves sound important." "They weren't there," said flatly. Walker leaned in. "Then we have to show them." So they did. That night they led a small group of skeptics down to the barracks, Henderson among them, still rolling her eyes, still unconvinced. The jacket was there just as had left it, folded sharp, pin gleaming, note pinned beneath it. The room grew quiet. "Jesus," Henderson whispered. She stepped closer, her skepticism cracking. "It's real." "As real as it gets," Stone's voice came from the doorway. She stepped inside, her presence commanding even in silence. And so was she. The crowd stared. For once nobody spoke. "Remember this," Stone said, her voice low but carrying. "Excellence doesn't always look the way you expect. Sometimes it looks like a woman with lip gloss at 500. Sometimes it looks like someone you laugh at before they show you who they really are. Don't make the mistake of judging too soon. In combat, that kind of mistake gets people killed." The words etched themselves into the air, into their bones. Later that night, lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the first time he'd seen her, the way he'd mocked her without hesitation. He thought about the range, the silence between her shots, the perfect rhythm. He thought about the colonel's face, pale with recognition, the way the room had gone still. And he thought about the note, 7 words, a lifetime of truth. Pretty doesn't mean weak. Remember that always. He closed his eyes and promised himself he would. Why was a myth sitting, folded on an empty bunk? That's what Lieutenant James kept asking himself as he lingered in his office long after duty hours. The base buzz had reached him like wildfire, staff sergeants whispering, privates repeating stories in chow, NCOs watching their words a little too carefully. He should have ignored it. Rumors ran through Fort every week, but this one refused to die. And it all circled back to a name that shouldn't have existed outside redacted files: Ghost Valley. He leaned over his computer screen, pulling up every unclassified database he could access. Nothing, just like Stone had said, but wasn't fresh out of West Point anymore. He'd been in long enough to know where to look for ghosts. He typed his credentials into the secure server, a blinking cursor, classified files, clearance checks that made his stomach tight. Then, finally, snippets, barely enough to form a picture. Operation Silent Thunder, Nevada Training Facility, Sierra designations, redacted after redacted like thick black paint smeared across truth. But there it was, stamped and sealed, Caldwell R. Sierra 7. Engagement success rate, 97%. Longest confirmed elimination, 2300 m. He sat back in his chair, pulse hammering. The young lieutenant who had dismissed the whispers in the dining facility now understood just how badly he'd misjudged. The knock at his door startled him. "Come in," he said quickly, closing the file. Master Sergeant Stone entered, 2 cups of coffee in hand, her face carrying that mixture of weariness and certainty he'd come to respect. She put 1 cup in front of him. "Working late, sir?" Hesitated, trying to understand what we missed. Stone nodded knowingly. "We all missed it. Question is, are we going to learn from it?" rubbed his temples. If she was this elite, this valuable, why was she here? Why marksmanship instruction? Why not somewhere specialized? Stone sipped her coffee before answering. Because the Army doesn't always know what to do with excellence. Budget cuts, restructuring, accountants making decisions about programs they'll never understand. Ghost Valley got shut down on paper, but soldiers like her don't disappear. They get reassigned. Quietly. The lieutenant leaned forward, and the makeup, the appearance. Stone studied him, testing to see if he was ready for the truth. Armor, she said simply. The kind that keeps people from seeing what you've really carried. If you think a little gloss and eyeliner are about vanity, you're missing the point. Swallowed, he thought about the way she'd sat in the dining facility, alone, flawless, untouched by a 12-hour day. He thought it was arrogance. Now he wasn't sure. The sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. Walker burst into the office, breathless, eyes wide. "You need to see this," he gasped. They followed him outside to the parking lot, where a crowd of soldiers gathered around a laptop glowing in the dusk. Hunched over the keyboard, his face grim. On the screen, a CNN correspondent reported from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Smoke, military vehicles, headlines scrolling across the bottom. "Sources confirm," the reporter said. "A high-value target was eliminated during a rescue operation. The precision shot, estimated at over 2 kilometers, allowed special forces to extract hostages without casualties." 2 kilometers. The soldiers went silent. The numbers alone chilled them. Henderson shook her head. "Could be anyone. There are other snipers in the world." Walker pointed at the timestamp. 6 hours ago, American military advisors in support. Who else do you think it was? His throat tightened. The distance, the timing, the silence in her shots. He didn't want to say it, didn't want to admit it. But Stone's voice cut through the stillness. Low, certain, that was her. The group didn't argue. They just stood there in the North Carolina night, watching grainy footage from a continent away, each of them processing the same truth. Somewhere out there, Caldwell had just done the impossible again. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because someone had to. Felt the weight settle on him like a rucksack filled with stone. Responsibility. He thought about his role as an officer, his failure to recognize her for what she was, the ease with which he dismissed her as superficial. He looked at Walker, at Davis. Young soldiers, their lessons fresh and raw. He looked at the pin folded on her bunk, the note she'd left behind. "We should do something with it," said. "Do what?" asked. "Make it permanent, a reminder, not just of her, but of what we almost missed." The soldiers nodded, not in agreement with their lieutenant, but in agreement with the lesson that had shaken them all. That night Fort buzzed with rumors, a shot across the world, a ghost with makeup, a pin glowing in a darkened barracks. And Lieutenant James sat in his office, staring at the challenge coin had been given, replaying her words in his mind. Sometimes the best camouflage is letting people dismiss you. Why did silence feel louder than gunfire? That's the question asked himself when he walked through the barracks at dawn. Her bunk was empty. No duffel, no boots, no trace of presence except for the jacket, folded sharp, crosshairs and skull gleaming in the weak light, and beneath it those 7 words still pinned in place. Pretty doesn't mean weak. Remember that always. The silence pressed down on him like weight. In the past, he would have cracked a joke, maybe muttered something cynical, but now there was nothing left to say. Word spread across the base with the velocity of a bullet. Staff Sergeant Caldwell was gone, not reassigned, not transferred, just gone, like a ghost vanishing into fog, and somehow the mystery of her departure was louder than her presence had ever been. At first, soldiers treated the bunk like a shrine. They'd come in pairs, then in groups, standing in front of the folded jacket as if waiting for it to speak. They whispered the story, each time adding new flourishes, impossible shots in Afghanistan, secret missions in deserts and mountains. The details twisted, exaggerated, became legend. But the truth remained. They had misjudged her. Sat in the DFAC one evening, staring at his tray without eating. The same mashed potatoes sat cold and untouched. Davis slid into the seat across from him, eyebrows raised. "You're just gonna move food around forever?" she asked. He shrugged, thinking about her, about how stupid we were. Davis let out a slow breath. "We saw what we wanted to see. Makeup, lip gloss, pretty face. We didn't see the rest." "Yeah," muttered, and we laughed. Across the room, Walker's voice carried. He was animated, speaking to a cluster of younger soldiers. His hands waved as he tried to convince them. "I'm telling you, she shot 40 out of 40, twice. Perfect." Then Colonel Williams herself said she was Ghost Valley, not a myth, not a story, the real thing. Private Henderson, new to the unit, rolled her eyes. "Ghost Valley doesn't exist. You got played." Walker slammed his palm on the table, louder than he meant to. "Tell that to the colonel." She knew exactly what that pin meant. The argument grew. Voices rose. The room filled with the sound of belief clashing with skepticism. That's when Master Sergeant Stone stood. Her presence cut the noise in half. She walked over, boots deliberate, expression flat. "Problem here." Walker pointed. "They don't believe us." Stone's eyes swept the crowd. Young faces, some eager to believe, some desperate to dismiss. She folded her arms. "Listen up," she said, her voice low but carrying. "Ghost Valley isn't a fairy tale, it's classified. You won't find it in manuals. You won't find it online. But I'll tell you this. What you witnessed 3 weeks ago was real. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't playing dress-up. She was better than most of us will ever be." The room fell silent. Henderson opened her mouth, but Stone raised her hand. "Private, how many confirmed kills do you have?" Henderson flushed. "I'm a mechanic, Master Sergeant." "Right, and that woman you called a fake. She had more confirmed eliminations than some companies rack up in a whole deployment. She did it at distances most of you can't even see clearly." The words hung heavy. Soldiers glanced at one another, doubt crumbling into uneasy acceptance. Spoke quietly, surprising even himself. "She told us the makeup was camouflage. The best way to hide is to look like what people expect to dismiss." The realization landed like a hammer. The laughter they'd shared weeks earlier now felt like a confession of blindness. "Smart," Stone said simply. "Know yourself, know your enemy." She knew we'd underestimate her, and she used that. Lesson for all of you: never let assumptions blind you. That night, soldiers filed into the barracks again. A crowd gathered around the jacket, the silver pin catching the overhead light. Up close, it looked ordinary, just metal, but in their minds it was more than that. "It's real," Henderson whispered, almost reverent. "As real as it gets," Stone confirmed. Someone asked softly, "What do we do with it?" Stone's answer was simple: "We remember." The weeks rolled forward, but the absence stayed sharp. The pin remained untouched. Soldiers stopped mocking, stopped snickering. Instead, they started asking different questions. What makes a soldier strong? What does excellence look like? What do we miss when we judge too fast? Even Lieutenant changed. The man who once dismissed the whispers now stayed late in his office, combing through redacted files. He found fragments enough to understand, and the weight of his failure pressed on him. One night, Stone walked in again with coffee. He was staring at a report, his eyes heavy. "If she was this elite," he murmured, "why here, why now?" Stone studied him for a long moment. "Maybe she wanted to teach us something, not just about marksmanship, about recognition, about what we see and what we don't." Nodded slowly. The thought had already crossed his mind. That weekend, he made a decision. The pin would not remain just a rumor's relic. It would be displayed, not as a trophy, not as gossip, but as a lesson. 2 months later, soldiers filed into the main briefing room for an unusual assembly. Curiosity buzzed through the air. Rumors had already spread. At the front, a wooden case sat on a table. Inside, mounted on dark velvet, gleamed the silver pin. Beneath it, a placard read, "Recognition Memorial, a lesson in excellence misjudged." Stood before them, posture straight, voice steady. 3 months ago, this base hosted Staff Sergeant Caldwell. Most of you remember her. Some mocked her, some doubted her, and all of us learned something. He gestured toward the case. This pin represents more than a battalion. It represents a failure of recognition. We almost missed excellence standing right in front of us because we let assumptions blind us. Sat in the third row, his jaw tight. The words hit home harder than he wanted. Davis sat beside him, her eyes glistening. His voice grew firmer. Our job isn't just to follow orders. It's to identify excellence wherever it hides, and to respect it even when it comes in forms we don't expect, especially then. Stone stepped forward, placing the case on a permanent mount near the front. The pin caught the fluorescent light, its crosshairs and skull both ominous and beautiful. Every soldier stared at it, some with awe, some with regret, some with new determination. When the briefing ended, nobody rushed out. They lingered, whispered, studied the case like it might reveal something new if they stared long enough. And in the quiet that followed, finally understood. She hadn't left them empty-handed. She had left them a mirror. The question wasn't who Caldwell was. The question was who they were becoming because of her. Would they make the same mistake again? That was the silent question hanging in the air when the next group of transfers arrived at Fort. New faces, fresh uniforms, boots still too clean, bearing the smell of fresh polish instead of hard miles. Soldiers eager to prove themselves, but already scanning each other with the sharp judgment born of insecurity. Among them stood Specialist Jennifer Park, slight, almost delicate, her frame hidden under standard-issue fatigues. An engineering degree tucked into her past, a quiet demeanor wrapped around her present. She stood straight, gear squared away, everything regulation perfect. But something about her drew the same dismissive smirks once had. "Check out the college girl," Private Stevens muttered under his breath. "Bet she's never fired anything bigger than a stapler." The words rippled through the formation, small laughs escaping like steam valves. Some soldiers nodded in agreement. Others rolled their eyes. And then, "Formation, attention." The voice cut sharp. Master Sergeant Stone. Promoted since departure, her reputation burnished by the way she'd handled the incident months earlier. Soldiers snapped straight. Her gaze swept the formation, hard and deliberate. She didn't just see uniforms. She saw habits, postures, assumptions. "Welcome to Fort," she said, her tone level. "You're here because the Army believes you have potential. Our job is to help you realize that potential and to teach you hard truths about excellence." She gestured toward the main briefing room. Through the windows, the glass case gleamed, catching the morning light. Inside, the silver pin shone. "Before training begins," Stone said, "you'll visit our recognition memorial. It tells the story of a soldier who taught this installation something valuable about assumptions." The formation shifted, murmurs sparking. Stevens smirked. He hadn't been there months ago, hadn't felt the weight of that silence. To him, it sounded like another cautionary tale dressed up for effect. He rolled his eyes, but the movement didn't escape Sergeant Davis, now wearing stripes of her own. She made a mental note to have a talk with him later. The soldiers filed into the briefing room, their boots echoing on the polished floor. The case waited at the front, the pin resting on velvet like a relic. Crosshairs etched over a skull, sharp and undeniable. Stone stood beside it. Her voice dropped lower, carrying weight. "Ghost Valley Battalion," she said. "Specialized long-range precision unit. Classified. Most of you will never read a single line of their files. The soldier who wore this pin was capable of shots at distances most of you can't even see clearly. She came through this installation and many of us underestimated her. Because of appearance, because of assumptions. That mistake became a lesson. The room hushed. Specialist Park stepped closer, her brow furrowed with thought. She studied the pin with a kind of interest that wasn't about rumor or legend. It was technical. Her gaze lingered on the details. "What was the longest confirmed distance?" she asked quietly. 2,300 meters, Stone replied. Park's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's mathematically complex. Wind alone would require advanced modeling, barometric pressure, temperature, ballistic coefficients." Her voice trailed off, but soldiers nearby glanced at her with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. The language was foreign to them, but not to her. "You know something about long-range shooting?" Stone asked. Park's answer was calm. "Applied physics. My degree focused on motion. Ballistics is just physics in motion." The words shifted the air. Stephen's smirk faltered. Soldiers turned, reassessing the quiet woman they just dismissed. Stone felt a ripple of recognition, something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon. She nodded slowly, tucking the observation away. The weeks that followed revealed more. Park trained methodically. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't fast, but she was relentless. She asked precise questions, not about tactics but about numbers, about angles, about wind shear. Instructors found themselves double-checking their own knowledge before answering. On the range, she wasn't the quickest to fire, but her shots landed in tight, disciplined groups, always consistent, always deliberate. Some soldiers muttered, "Good at the science," Stephen scoffed after watching her drill, "but what happens when people shoot back?" The answer came during a joint exercise with special operations units. Park was paired with a veteran sniper instructor for reconnaissance. The mission required precision range estimation across difficult terrain. She was flawless. Distances called to within meters, targets identified instantly. Her communication crisp, clear, unflinching. When the after-action report came back, it carried a rare recommendation: Specialist Park for advanced sniper training. The announcement dropped like a stone. The same soldiers who doubted her were left scrambling for excuses. Stevens avoided eye contact for days. Now wearing corporal stripes found him after formation. His voice carried weight the younger man couldn't ignore. "Trust me on this one," said quietly. "Keep an open mind. I learned the hard way." That evening, Park found herself alone in the briefing room. She stood before the memorial, her reflection faint in the glass case. The pin gleamed back at her, silent and unyielding. She'd heard fragments of the story, enough to piece together who Caldwell was, what she'd endured, what she'd left behind. Stone walked in quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee, a tradition by now. She handed one to Park. "Thinking about the path ahead?" Stone asked. Park's voice was steady. "Thinking about responsibility. If I follow this track, if I step into this world, I'll be carrying on something that matters." Stone nodded. "Excellence isn't about achievement, it's about capability serving purpose. She taught us that." Park's gaze didn't leave the pin. "The makeup. Everyone said it was vanity, but it wasn't, was it?" "What do you think it was?" Park's lips pressed together. "Armor, psychological camouflage, a way to carry herself without being swallowed by what she'd done." Stone's eyes softened. "You understand more than most." "I understand," Park said quietly, "that someday I might face the same assumptions, the same judgments, and I'll have to decide how to carry myself." They stood in silence, coffee cooling in their hands, the memorial between them. Outside, Fort pulsed with routine boots on gravel, voices shouting cadence, trucks rumbling past. But inside that room, history breathed quietly through a pin left behind. The cycle had begun again. New soldiers, new mistakes, new lessons. And somewhere out there, Caldwell still walked unseen, teaching lessons without words. Would they carry her lesson into the next generation? That was the question echoing through Fort as months turned into seasons. The pin remained in its glass case. The note stayed framed beneath it, its 7 words etched like scripture. Pretty doesn't mean weak. Remember that always. At first, soldiers stopped to look because it was new, then because it was curious. But slowly something changed. The memorial wasn't just a relic anymore. It became part of the rhythm of the base, woven into the fabric of its culture. New arrivals were taken to see it during orientation. Instructors referenced it during marksmanship briefings. Even PT sessions ended with the occasional reminder, "Don't underestimate the one you least expect." Caldwell taught us that. Lieutenant, who once buried his shame under redacted files, found himself invited to speak at NCO development courses. He never dramatized. He never exaggerated. He simply told the truth. "We laughed," he said bluntly, standing before a room of fresh sergeants. "We mocked what we didn't understand, and we learned the hard way that judgment blinds faster than smoke in combat." The words stuck, not because they were polished, but because they carried weight. Corporal carried his own weight too. The memory of his jokes haunted him, but he used it. When younger soldiers slipped into the same behavior, he stepped in. "Cut it out," he'd say, his voice low but firm. "You don't know who you're looking at. I didn't, and I'll regret it the rest of my career." Some listened, some didn't, but the seed planted itself anyway. In the dining facility, Davis started to notice changes. Soldiers who once rolled their eyes at someone too put together now hesitated. Sometimes they still joked, but the laughter faltered faster. The story of Caldwell lingered, invisible but alive. One night, Specialist Jennifer Park stood at the range with a group of trainees. Her posture was relaxed, her breathing steady. The weapon felt natural in her hands now, not because of repetition alone, but because of conviction. She lined up her shot, wind in her hair, calculations running through her head like second nature. 10 rounds, 10 tight groupings. The instructor whistled low. "Park, you ever think about sniper school?" She lowered her rifle, her expression calm. "Yes, Sergeant." The other soldiers muttered, some impressed, some skeptical, but none dared laugh outright. Not anymore. Afterward, Park lingered by the memorial. She traced the glass with her eyes, studying the pin like it held a secret meant for her alone. "What do you see when you look at it?" Davis asked, stepping beside her. Park thought carefully before answering. "Not just a soldier, a test, a mirror, a reminder that how others see you is often a reflection of their own limits, not yours." Davis nodded slowly. "That's exactly what it is." Across the base, the memorial began weaving itself into doctrine. Training slides featured a single line: "Excellence doesn't always look like what you expect." Instructors challenged their soldiers to think beyond appearances. A subtle shift, small but steady. Even command took notice. Colonel Williams, who had first recognized the insignia on his collar, drafted a paper quietly circulated through leadership channels. It wasn't about Ghost Valley, not directly. It was about recognition, hidden talent, and the cost of assumptions. The paper closed with one sentence: "The most dangerous soldier is often the one you don't notice until it's too late." It became a quotation passed from company to company, a quiet truth whispered in classrooms and motor pools alike. And yet, despite the institutionalization, despite the stories, despite the mounting reverence, Caldwell herself remained absent. Gone but not forgotten, present but unseen. The soldiers who had once mocked her still carried the memory fresh in their bones. Some nights dreamed of the firing range, the silence between her shots, the rhythm like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Other nights he dreamed of her walking out of the dining facility, untouched by their words, steady as a stone in water. Stone, now sergeant major, often wondered what thought of all this. Did she know her lesson had become something bigger than rumor? Did she know soldiers whispered her name like prayer? Did she know the pin she'd left behind had become an altar? Nobody knew, and that was the point. Her absence mattered as much as her presence had. Because sometimes the greatest mark you leave is not in what you do, but in what others learn after you're gone. That night under the Carolina stars, Specialist Park stood outside the barracks. She lifted her eyes to the sky, to the same dark horizon where once looked. She thought of the distance, 2,300 meters, numbers that sounded impossible until they were. She whispered softly, not to anyone, not even to herself, but to the unseen figure whose shadow stretched across her path. "I'll remember." Did she know her experiment would change the army? That's what Sergeant Major Stone wondered the night she saw her again. It was late, past taps, past the hum of the day. The motor pool sat quiet, engines cooling under moonlight. Stone had been walking back from a meeting when she noticed the figure, lean, poised, moving with the kind of quiet confidence you couldn't fake. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. Ghosts had a way of showing up when you thought about them too much. But then the figure turned and the light hit her face. Caldwell. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in the same regulation style. Her uniform looked the same, but carried the subtle wear of someone who'd lived harder days than most. Her face, still meticulous. Eyeliner sharp, lip gloss catching the moonlight. Stone froze, her breath caught halfway. "You're back," she said softly. Smile was faint, almost apologetic, just passing through. They walked together in silence for a moment, boots crunching gravel. No fanfare, no crowds, just two soldiers in the quiet of the night. Stone finally asked the question that had weighed on her for months. "Did you know, when you left that pin behind, did you know it would ripple this far?" Looked ahead, her gaze steady. "I hoped it would, but I didn't know." Stone studied her profile. Why here, why now? His answer was simple: to see what you did with it. The next morning the whispers began again, but this time different. Soldiers spotted her walking near the memorial. No announcement, no briefing, just her presence. The air shifted instantly. Corporal caught sight of her first. His chest tightened. Shame, respect, all colliding. He approached cautiously, heart pounding like a "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Looked at him, eyes calm, expression unreadable. "You already gave it," she said softly, "when you changed." The words pierced deeper than any reprimand. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. Walker came next, then Davis. Each one approached not with excuses but with gratitude. She accepted none of it like a queen accepting praise. She listened, nodded, moved on. When she finally stood in front of the glass case, the pin staring back at her from velvet, the room fell into reverent silence. Soldiers packed the briefing hall, breathing shallow, watching her every move. Didn't speak at first. She simply studied the pin, the note, the memorial her absence had built. Then she turned, her voice low but carrying. "This was never about me," she said. "It was about you, about what you see and what you don't, about the cost of underestimating what doesn't fit your picture of strength." Her words landed like rounds fired slow and steady. "Camouflage isn't always colors and patterns," she continued. "Sometimes it's a smile, sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's letting people believe what they want until the truth arrives. Don't forget that." No one moved, no one breathed, even the air seemed to bow under the weight of it. She stepped closer to the case, her reflection merging with the pin's gleam. For a moment, it looked like two images overlapping, her present self and the ghost she had left behind. Then she turned and walked out. No applause followed, no salute, just silence. Because silence in that moment meant more than any cheer. After she left, the soldiers stood for a long time unmoving. Each carried something different: regret, admiration, determination, but all carried weight. Lieutenant, standing at the back, felt the words etch themselves into his chest. He'd failed to see her once. He would not fail again, not with anyone. Stone watched the younger soldiers, their faces lit with something between awe and reflection. She thought about the question that had haunted her. did know what she had started. Now she understood. She hadn't just started something, she left a compass. Days later was gone again. No farewell, no orders posted on the board, just absence. But this time it wasn't silence, it was presence in disguise. Because she was still there, in the memorial, in the stories, in the doctrine being written, in the quiet corrections when soldiers started to sneer. She was there every time someone remembered not to underestimate. And Fort moved forward, stronger, sharper, more aware. Because one woman had worn gloss at 500 and dared to be dismissed. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.